I sat at an old oak table in my workshop, taking apart a Zenit transistor radio manufactured in 1978. The case was cracked, but the mechanism could still be used with proper care. At 73 years old, I still enjoyed repairing electronics. The process required patience and precision, qualities I had always valued in myself. A magnifying glass on a movable bracket illuminated the circuit board where I was carefully desoldering a damaged capacitor. The soldering iron hissed, emitting a thin stream of smoke, and the sound had a calming effect on me. Here, in the basement workshop of my home on Richmond Street in Augusta, I felt in control. No one could burst in and demand immediate explanations or money. No one threw tantrums or slammed doors. The radio belonged to Mrs. Cooper from the next street. The elderly woman listened to the news every morning and tuned into classical music in the evenings. When the radio fell silent, she was as upset as if she had lost an old friend. I understood that feeling. After Dorothea's death a year ago, my own habits became my only support in a changed world. Dorothea always said that I was too soft on our daughter, Savannah. Maybe my wife was right, but at the time, I thought that strictness would only push the child away. Now, looking at the result of our upbringing, I realized that we had created a monster. 45-year-old Savannah still believed that the whole world was obliged to fulfill her wishes, and if anyone dared to say no, she would throw such a tantrum that it was easier to give in. The new capacitor fit perfectly. I soldered its contacts and checked the connections with a multimeter. All readings were normal. Mrs. Cooper's radio would work like new, maybe even better than before it broke. Unlike human relationships, electronics can be repaired if you know how they work. Every part has its place and purpose. Every wire leads where it should lead. It's logical and predictable. I worked slowly, enjoying the process. There was no need to rush. Since retiring 8 years ago, my days belonged only to me. For 42 years, I worked as a repairman for industrial equipment at a textile factory, getting up at 5 in the morning and coming home tired and dirty. At the time, it seemed to me that retirement would never come. But when it did, I felt reborn. At first, Dorothea was worried that I would be bored at home, but I quickly found things to do. The workshop in the basement became my own personal world, where order and tranquility reigned. Neighbors began to bring me broken appliances, then their friends, and gradually I built up a small clientele. I charged a nominal fee, just enough to cover the cost of parts. The main thing was not the money. I enjoyed bringing things back to life. Coming up from the basement, I washed my hands and put the kettle on. Outside the kitchen window, the October twilight was already gathering. But I liked these quiet evenings. I could read the newspaper, listen to music, or just sit in Dorothea's chair and remember our conversations. We had been married for 46 years, and she knew me better than I knew myself. The kitchen looked exactly the same as when my wife was alive. The same blue curtains, the same set of dishes, the same small checkered tablecloth. I didn't change anything because change seemed like a betrayal of her memory. Sometimes, pouring tea into 2 cups out of habit, I caught myself thinking that Dorothea was about to walk in and complain about the neighbor's dog that had dug up her flower bed again. But Dorothea was gone, and I had to learn to live alone. The first few months were difficult. The house seemed too big and too quiet, and simple tasks like grocery shopping or doing laundry required unexpected effort. Gradually, I developed a new daily routine that helped me cope with loneliness. I would get up at 7, have breakfast, work in my workshop until lunchtime, go for a walk or do some shopping after lunch, and read or watch TV in the evening. Dorothea warned me about Savannah long before our daughter married that spineless Bradley Morris. My wife had seen how Savannah manipulated people, how she used tears and tantrums to get what she wanted. But I hoped that with age, my daughter would change, become more mature and responsible. Vain hopes. At 45, Savannah was as selfish as she had been at 15. I remembered how, as a teenager, she demanded expensive clothes, threatening to make a scene in front of her classmates if we refused. I remembered how she would get sick before tests and force Dorothy to call the school. I remembered the endless tantrums because we didn't buy her a car for her 18th birthday. Each time we gave in, thinking it was the last time that our daughter would understand the limits of what was acceptable. She didn't understand. Instead, Savannah learned a simple truth. If you scream loud enough, your parents will give you whatever you want. This strategy worked with us, and then with Bradley, whom she met in college. The guy was from a good family, studied business administration, and seemed like a solid choice for a son-in-law. But he turned out to be unacceptably soft-hearted. He was more afraid of Savannah than of his mother-in-law. Their wedding 20 years ago turned into a real spectacle. Savannah demanded the best and most expensive of everything: a dress from a famous designer, a restaurant in the city center, an orchestra, flowers brought in from Atlanta. I spent almost all of our savings on this wedding, but Dorothea persuaded me not to skimp. A daughter gets married once in a lifetime, she said. Let her remember this day. Savannah remembered. And she decided that from now on, all the special moments in her life should be paid for by her parents. Buying a house, having children, anniversaries, vacations. She always found a reason to ask for money. We gave it to her because we wanted to see our grandchildren and remain a part of their lives. But the more we gave, the more she demanded. And then the children grew up and left to study in other states. James enrolled at California Tech, Emily at Columbia University. Both were smart kids, but for some reason, they weren't in a hurry to visit their parents. Savannah complained that the children were ungrateful, but I suspected they were just tired of their mother's demands. The phone rang as I was buttering my bread. The number was familiar. Savannah. I didn't rush to pick up the phone, letting it ring several times. Maybe she would change her mind and find someone else to solve her problems. Over the past few months, the calls had become regular. She needed money to repair her roof. She wanted to take out a loan against my house. She demanded that I rewrite my will in her favor. But the calls continued. Savannah was persistent, I had to admit. Finally, I picked up the phone. Hello? Dad, it's me. Bradley and I will come over tomorrow evening. We need to discuss something. Her tone was businesslike, almost commanding. That was how she spoke when she had already made up her mind and wasn't going to listen to any objections. I had known that tone since Savannah was 10 years old. What exactly? I'll tell you when I get there. It's important, Dad, very important. She hung up without giving me a chance to refuse the meeting. Typical Savannah. She presents everyone with a fait accompli and then is surprised when people resist her plans. When I was younger, I would have been angry at such arrogance, but now I just shook my head. I didn't have the energy to be upset, and there wasn't much point anyway. I finished my sandwich and went up to the living room. There were photos on the shelf: our wedding, Savannah's birth, family holidays. In one photo, my daughter was about 12 years old, smiling and showing off her new braces. At the time, it seemed to me that we had many happy years ahead of us, that Savannah would grow up, find her way, and visit us on Sundays for family dinners. The reality turned out to be completely different. Savannah grew up, but she never matured. She still believed that the world should conform to her desires, and if something went wrong, everyone around her was to blame, except her. Bradley turned out to be a weakling who couldn't stand up to his wife, and now they both regularly came to me for help. The last time they came was 3 weeks ago. Savannah wanted me to sell the house and move into a nursing home and give her the proceeds to start some kind of business. She talked about a beauty salon or a clothing store. I don't remember exactly. Every month, my daughter came up with a new business idea that was supposed to make her rich. None of her previous ventures had been profitable, but Savannah was sure that the next one would definitely be a success. I refused politely but firmly. I explained that the house was my fortress, that I had spent my whole life here with Dorothea, and that I would never leave. Savannah threw a tantrum, screaming that I was selfish, that I didn't think about her future, that after my death, the house would have to be sold anyway. So why not do it now when the money was needed by living people? Bradley sat silently, occasionally muttering something reassuring, but did not dare to contradict his wife. In 20 years of marriage, this man had never learned to say no to Savannah. He worked as a sales manager at a car dealership and earned a decent salary, but there was never enough money. His wife spent faster than he earned. Then they left, slamming the door behind them, but I knew they would return. Savannah had an amazing ability to forget about failures and make new plans on how to get money out of her father. And now she's calling again, making appointments without my consent, acting as if my house is her personal cash register. But I was no longer going to play the role of sponsor for my daughter's whims. At 73, a person doesn't have much time left, and I wanted to spend it peacefully, doing what I enjoy. repairing radios, reading, working in the garden. Simple pleasures that don't require any emotional investment on my part. Tomorrow, Savannah will arrive with her plans, but this time she will be refused. Whatever her demands may be, financial, property-related, or anything else, the answer will be the same, no, and that's final. I turned on my old stereo and put on a Mozart concert recording. The music filled the room, creating an atmosphere of peace that I valued so much. Outside the window, the lights of the neighboring houses came on, but here, in my living room, time seemed to stand still. The next day, I got up at 7 in the morning as usual, had coffee and toast, and went down to the workshop to check on yesterday's radio. Mrs. Cooper's radio came to life. The morning program with classical music flowed from the speakers. The sound was clear and rich. I wrapped the radio in a soft cloth and placed it on the shelf next to the other repaired devices. Tomorrow I will take it to its owner. She will be happy. The day dragged on slowly. I tried to read the newspaper, but my thoughts kept returning to Savannah's upcoming visit. What would it be this time? A new business project? Bradley's debts? Or had she decided to return to the idea of selling the house? In any case, nothing good was to be expected. My daughter never came just to talk or find out how her father was doing. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the familiar sound of an engine. Savannah's red Chevrolet was turning into my driveway. The car was new, bought on credit a year ago, and my daughter was very proud of this purchase. She parks as if she were participating in a speed driving competition, abruptly with screeching tires and slamming doors. I didn't go out to greet my guests, but remained sitting in my chair with a newspaper in my hands. Let them ring the doorbell, as they should. Savannah had a habit of coming in without knocking, but after Dorothea's death, I changed the locks and didn't give my daughter new keys. This decision caused her to be very upset, but I remained adamant. My house, my rules. The doorbell rang sharply and long, then again. I slowly got up, smoothed out my shirt, and went to open the door. Standing outside was Savannah in a bright pink coat and high boots, with Bradley looming beside her, looking miserable. He always looked like he was preparing for an unpleasant conversation with his boss. "Hi, Dad." Savannah kissed me on the cheek and walked into the house without waiting to be invited. "How are you? You look good for your age." For my age, as if I already had one foot in the grave. At 73, I felt quite spry, did exercises every morning, walked for an hour a day, and could fix any electrical appliance as well as a young repairman. But Savannah always knew how to give a compliment in a way that sounded like an insult. "Hello, Savannah." "Bradley." I nodded to my son-in-law, who shook my hand with his damp palm. They walked into the living room, and Savannah immediately settled into Dorothea's chair. She did this every time, as if she wanted to emphasize that she was now the main woman in the house. Bradley sat down on the edge of the sofa, folded his hands in his lap, and stared at the floor. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked politely. "No, Dad, we won't be long." Savannah took a mirror out of her purse and touched up her lipstick. "We have a proposal for you, more precisely a request. Although no, not a request, but rather a business proposal." I sat down opposite her and prepared to listen. Experience told me that all of Savannah's business proposals ended with someone having to give her money or property. Usually that someone was me. "Saturday is my birthday," my daughter began, and I remembered that she was indeed turning 46. "I want to throw a real party, not at a restaurant like usual, but at home, more precisely here, in this house." She looked around the living room appraisingly, as if planning to rearrange the furniture. "There's a lot of space here, a large kitchen, a convenient layout. We can invite 30 people, set up tables in the living room and dining room, have music and dancing. It will be a great party." "And what am I supposed to do during this party?" I asked. "Well, you can stay if you want, although to be honest, it would be better if you went somewhere else. To Aunt Martha's, for example, or to a motel. I'll pay for the room, don't worry." She spoke as if she were doing me a favor. Kicking me out of my own house and paying for a motel, her generosity was simply astonishing. Bradley shuddered at these words and gave his wife a warning look, but Savannah didn't notice this. "I see," I said. "And who's going to clean up after the party?" "Well, me, of course, and Bradley will help. We'll tidy everything up, I promise. Dad, you understand how important this is to me? 46 is a big milestone. I want to celebrate it beautifully, surrounded by friends. I looked at Bradley. He was still studying the pattern on the carpet, clearly not wanting to participate in the conversation. In the 20 years I've known him, I've never seen this man express his own opinion in front of his wife. He agreed, nodded, apologized, but never objected. Savannah, I said calmly, the answer is no. What do you mean no? She sat up straight in her chair, and the smile disappeared from her face. No, you're not having a party. Here, this is my house, and I don't want 30 drunk people stomping around in it all night. Dad, but why? Savannah's voice became thin, almost childlike. That was how she spoke as a teenager when she wanted to beg for something. What does it cost you? One evening? I'll organize everything, clean everything up. You won't even know anything was here. I said no, and that's final. Savannah stood up and began pacing the room. When she was nervous, she needed to move, another habit from childhood. Bradley looked up and glanced at me with something resembling gratitude. Apparently, he wasn't thrilled with his wife's idea either. You're selfish, Savannah said, stopping in front of me. You live alone in a huge house and don't let anyone else use it. Mom would never have done that. She understood that family meant supporting each other. Bringing up Dorothea was a cheap shot, and we both knew it. My wife did love to have guests, but she would never have allowed our home to become an entertainment center for strangers. Mom was the hostess of the house and could decide who to invite, I replied. Now I'm the host, and my decision is final. But that's not fair. Savannah stamped her foot, just like she did when she was a child. I have rights to this house. I'm your daughter, your only heir. As long as I'm alive, you have no rights to my house. What happens after I die? Only time will tell. It was a direct threat of disinheritance, and Savannah got the hint. Her face flushed, her eyes narrowed. I saw the signs of an impending tantrum and braced myself for the explosion. You can't do this to me, she shouted. You always sit there like a mouse, never making any decisions. If you were a real man, you would have talked to my father like a man a long time ago. Bradley cringed even more. I almost felt sorry for the poor guy. Living with a wife like that was a real punishment. But he chose this cross himself, and he would have to carry it alone. You know what, Dad? Savannah came up close to me, her voice quiet and angry. Maybe it's time to think about a nursing home. At your age, it's hard for people to live alone. Anything can happen. You could fall, have a heart attack, forget to turn off the gas, and no one would find you here. It was a direct threat. Savannah was hinting that she could go to court and have me declared incompetent. Of course, she had no grounds for doing so, but she could try, and even an unsuccessful attempt would cause me a lot of trouble. I'm perfectly capable of running my own household, I said in an even voice. The doctors haven't found any problems with my memory or coordination, so your threats are unfounded. For now, Savannah hissed, but time is working against you. Every year, every month, you get weaker, and sooner or later you'll need help. My help. And then we'll remember this conversation. She picked up her purse and headed for the exit. Bradley hurried after her, muttering something like an apology as he went. The front door slammed, the car engine started, and they drove away, leaving behind only the scent of expensive perfume and the feeling of an unpleasant conversation. I remained seated in my chair, thinking about what had happened. Savannah was furious, and that meant she wouldn't calm down easily. My daughter never took no for an answer, always looking for ways to get her way. As a child, she would sulk for weeks and throw tantrums until her parents gave in. But now I was no longer the person who gave in for the sake of peace in the family. Dorothy was gone, my grandchildren had grown up and lived far away, and I could finally think about myself. And I wasn't going to turn my home into a playground for my daughter's friends. However, knowing Savannah, it wouldn't end there. She would surely find a new way to pressure me, new arguments, new threats. Perhaps she would involve Bradley in an active role or ask one of her acquaintances to talk to me. She had a vivid imagination when it came to getting what she wanted. I spent the evening quietly, reading a book and listening to music. But my thoughts kept returning to Savannah's words about the nursing home. Of course, it was an empty threat. The court would not declare me incompetent based on mere suspicions. But the attempt itself could cause a lot of trouble, and my daughter understood that perfectly well. I thought that after yesterday's conversation, my daughter would leave me alone for at least a week, but I was wrong. On Thursday morning, as I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, the phone rang again. Savannah, of course. I didn't rush to answer, letting the phone ring several times, hoping she would change her mind about calling. But the calls continued with the persistence of a woodpecker. "Hello," I finally said. "Dad, I've changed my mind about Saturday." Savannah's voice sounded surprisingly cheerful. "Bradley and I discussed everything again, and I realized I was wrong. You're absolutely right. You can't have loud parties in a house where an elderly person lives." This opening to the conversation alarmed me more than yesterday's shouting. When Savannah agreed with someone else's opinion, it could only mean one thing. She had come up with a new way to get her way. "I'm glad you understand," I replied cautiously. "Of course I understand. I'm not heartless. That's why I decided to have a very quiet gathering. About 10 of my closest friends, no music, no dancing. We'll just sit, talk, and drink tea. You won't even notice that there are guests in the house. 10 friends will turn into 20, tea will turn into alcohol, and quiet conversations will turn into loud arguments." I knew my daughter too well to believe such promises. As a teenager, she constantly used this tactic, asking permission for an innocent walk with a friend and returning home at 2 in the morning with half a dozen questionable individuals. "Savannah, I have already made my final decision," I replied firmly. "There will be no parties in my house, loud or quiet." "But Dad, it's my birthday. Don't you want your daughter to have a nice birthday? You can celebrate somewhere else. Rent a room in a restaurant, rent a banquet hall, or even throw a party at your own house." "We don't have enough room at home. The apartment is small, and there will be a lot of guests. Dad, please. I'm only asking you this once. I promise I'll never bother you with requests like this again." She already promised that last year when she wanted to throw a New Year's Eve party at my place. And the year before that, when she asked for a house to celebrate Bradley's latest promotion at work. Savannah's promises were worth no more than a drunkard's vows to quit drinking. "No," I repeated and hung up. The phone rang again 2 minutes later. I didn't answer. Then again, and again. Savannah was stubborn as a mule and could call for hours if she thought it would help break my resistance. I turned off the sound and went to the basement to work on a new order, an old TV that didn't show half the channels. The workshop was quiet and peaceful. I took apart the back panel of the TV and began to study the circuit diagram. The problem turned out to be in the antenna input. The contacts were oxidized and the signal was poor. It was a simple repair that took half an hour, but the owner of the device was probably already planning to buy a new TV. People have forgotten how to fix things. In my day, if something broke, the first thing we did was try to fix it, and only then did we think about buying a new one. Now it's easier to throw it away and buy a replacement. This approach applied not only to technology, but also to relationships. If problems arose, it was better to break up and find a new partner than to work on correcting mistakes. Savannah also adhered to this philosophy. If something didn't work out the first time, she didn't try to find a compromise or change her approach. She simply increased the pressure, raised her voice, and threw tantrums. Sooner or later, those around her gave in, and she got what she wanted. This strategy worked with her parents, teachers, classmates, and even Bradley. She met him this way after he gave in to her pressure after several refusals to go on a date. I soldered new contacts to the antenna input and checked the signal quality. All channels were clear. Another thing saved from the trash can. Unlike family relationships, electronics could actually be fixed with a little effort and patience. Going upstairs around noon, I saw 12 missed calls on my phone display. All from Savannah, of course. I turned on the answering machine and made myself lunch, eggs and bacon with toast. My appetite was excellent, despite the morning's troubles. Or maybe it was because of them. I finally stopped giving in to my daughter's whims and felt free. After lunch, I decided to walk to the post office and the store. Fresh air and exercise always helped me think more clearly. It was sunny and cool outside, a typical October day in Georgia, when summer was finally giving way to fall. The leaves on the trees were beginning to turn yellow, but there were still a few weeks left before the real fall. On the way, I met Mrs. Cooper, who was walking her old spaniel. The woman was delighted to see me and thanked me for fixing her radio. Now she could listen to the morning news and evening classical music again. We talked about the weather, supermarket prices, and how the neighborhood had changed in recent years. It was a pleasant, unhurried conversation that required no money, no sacrifices, and no compromises. When I returned home around 3 in the afternoon, I found that my answering machine was overflowing with messages. 22 calls during my absence. I didn't bother listening to them. It wasn't hard to guess what they were about. Savannah had probably gone through all the stages from requests to threats and was now in a state of righteous anger. I made myself some tea and settled into an armchair with a book when I heard the sound of a familiar car. Savannah was back, and this time she wasn't alone. 2 cars pulled up in the yard. My daughter and son-in-law got out of the red Chevrolet, and a woman I didn't recognize, about 40 years old, wearing a bright dress and carrying a large shoulder bag, got out of the blue Ford. I didn't get up from my chair and continued reading. Let them ring the doorbell, as they should. The first ring was polite, the second more insistent, and the third already irritated. Finally, I heard Savannah's voice. "Dad, I know you're home. Open up, we're not leaving." I had to put down my book and go to the door. Through the glass panel, I could see 3 visitors. Savannah with a gloomy face, Bradley with his usual guilty expression, and a stranger who was explaining something quickly to my daughter, waving her arms. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "Open up, Dad. We need to talk. It's very important." "We already talked yesterday. My answer hasn't changed. I have Carol with me. She'll help us organize everything." "Open the door. Don't make us stand on the street like beggars." Carol was apparently an event planner or something like that. Savannah had brought reinforcements, hoping that a professional would be able to convince me better than she could. Naive. No argument will make me change my mind. I opened the door but remained standing on the threshold, not inviting the guests in. "Dad, this is Carol Jenkins. She organizes private events," Savannah began, pointing to her companion. I asked her to look at the house and make a plan for the party, a very small, intimate one. 15 people maximum. 15 already, and there were 10 this morning. By evening, it will probably be 25. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stevens." Carol smiled a professional smile. "Your daughter told me about her birthday plans. You have a wonderful house, perfect for family celebrations. I'm sure we can arrange everything so that no one is disturbed." "Young lady," I replied politely, "I'm afraid you've wasted your time. There will be no celebrations in my house." "But why?" Carol looked genuinely surprised. "A birthday is a family celebration. Isn't it natural for a daughter to want to celebrate it in her parents' home?" "It may be natural, but I don't want to turn my home into a restaurant." Savannah tugged at Carol's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. The organizer nodded understandingly. "Mr. Stevens, what if we guarantee complete silence? No dancing, no loud music. Just an elegant dinner with family and close friends. I've organized hundreds of events like this and can ensure everything runs smoothly." "No," I said and started to close the door. "Wait!" Savannah stuck her foot into the doorway. "Dad, you're being selfish. It's my birthday, my party. Is it really so hard for you to let me have the house for one night?" "Savannah, move your foot," I said calmly. "Otherwise, I'll have to call the police." My daughter looked at me suspiciously, as if she couldn't believe her father was capable of such a threat. But something in my tone convinced her that I was serious, and she backed off. "Fine," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Then we'll have a party without your permission. We'll come on Saturday night with all our guests, and there's nothing you can do about it." "Try it," I replied and closed the door. I heard them arguing heatedly on the porch, then car doors slamming and driving away. Savannah wasn't joking. She really could come with a crowd of guests and try to force the party to happen. As a child, she often used similar tactics, throwing tantrums in public places where her parents couldn't stop her without attracting the attention of those around them. But now she was dealing not with parents who were afraid of scandal, but with a man who had nothing left to lose. I wasn't afraid of neighborhood gossip. I didn't worry about the family's reputation, and I wasn't going to play the role of a loving father in front of strangers. If Savannah wanted war, she would get it. That evening, I took a travel bag out of the closet and started packing. A few shirts, a change of underwear, toiletries, the medication I took to regulate my blood pressure. Savannah thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know me very well. Every problem has a solution. You just have to find the right approach. Tom Wilson, my neighbor across the street, was a great guy. We had been friends for 10 years, often exchanging tools and helping each other with minor repairs. Tom lived alone after his wife's death, just like me, and we understood each other perfectly. He would certainly not refuse to offer hospitality to an old friend, but simply leaving the house was not enough. Savannah had to understand that she could not ignore other people's boundaries and take their property with impunity. The lesson had to be clear and memorable, and I knew exactly how to deliver it. Going down to the basement, I opened the electrical panel and carefully studied the wiring diagram. The main switch cut off the power to the entire house, and individual circuit breakers controlled the power to different rooms. The water heater, furnace, lighting, outlets, everything could be turned off with a single flick of the wrist. Without electricity, the house became an inconvenient and unattractive place to hold parties. No lights, no music, no way to heat food or make drinks. The refrigerator wasn't working, so there was nothing to drink except tap water. And on October evenings, it got quite chilly in a house without heating. It was an elegant way to ruin any celebration without resorting to scandals or calling the police. Technical sabotage that looked like a normal breakdown. Savannah could scream and fuss all she wanted, but what could she do with the power off? Find an electrician on a Saturday night? Fix a complex breakdown in an hour? Impossible. I went to bed feeling satisfied. Tomorrow morning, I'll call Tom, arrange a place to stay, and by evening, Savannah will have learned a lesson she won't soon forget. Maybe it would make her reconsider her attitude toward her father and realize that I'm not a helpless old man who can be pushed around. I thought that after yesterday's conversation, my daughter would leave me alone for at least a week, but I was wrong. On Thursday morning, as I was drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, the phone rang again. Savannah, of course. I didn't rush to answer, letting the phone ring several times, hoping she would change her mind. But the calls continued with the persistence of a woodpecker. "Hello," I finally said. "Dad, I've changed my mind about Saturday." Savannah's voice sounded surprisingly cheerful. "Bradley and I talked it over again, and I realized I was wrong. You're absolutely right. You can't have loud parties in a house where an elderly person lives." This start to the conversation alarmed me more than yesterday's shouting. When Savannah agreed with someone else's opinion, it could only mean one thing. She had come up with a new way to get her way. "I'm glad you understand," I replied cautiously. "Of course I understand. I'm not heartless. That's why I decided to have a very quiet gathering. About 10 of my closest friends, no music, no dancing. We'll just sit, talk, and drink tea. You won't even notice that there are guests in the house. 10 friends will turn into 20, tea will turn into alcohol, and quiet conversations will turn into loud arguments." I knew my daughter too well to believe such promises. As a teenager, she constantly used this tactic, asking permission for an innocent walk with a friend, then coming home at 2 in the morning with half a dozen questionable characters. "Savannah, I've already made my final decision," I replied firmly. "There will be no parties in my house, loud or quiet." "But Dad, it's my birthday. Don't you want your daughter to have a nice birthday?" "You can have it somewhere else. Reserve a room at a restaurant, rent a banquet hall, or even throw a party at your own home. We don't have enough room at home. The apartment is small and there will be a lot of guests." "Dad, please, I'm only asking you this once. I promise I'll never bother you with requests like this again." She already promised that last year when she wanted to throw a New Year's Eve party at my place. And the year before that, when she asked for a house to celebrate Bradley's latest promotion at work. Savannah's promises were worth no more than a drunkard's vows to quit drinking. "No," I repeated and hung up the phone. The phone rang again 2 minutes later. I didn't answer. Then again, and again. Savannah was stubborn as a mule and could call for hours if she thought it would help break my resistance. I turned off the sound and went to the basement to work on a new order, an old TV that didn't show half the channels. The workshop was quiet and peaceful. I took apart the back panel of the TV and began to study the circuit diagram. The problem turned out to be in the antenna input. The contacts were oxidized, and the signal was poor. It was a simple repair that took half an hour, but the owner of the device was probably already planning to buy a new TV. People have forgotten how to fix things. In my day, if something broke, the first thing we did was try to fix it, and only then did we think about buying a new one. Now it's easier to throw it away and buy a replacement. This approach applied not only to technology, but also to relationships. If problems arose, it was better to break up and find a new partner than to work on fixing mistakes. Savannah also adhered to this philosophy. If something didn't work out the first time, she didn't try to find a compromise or change her approach. She just increased the pressure, raised her voice, and threw tantrums. Sooner or later, those around her gave in and she got what she wanted. This strategy worked with her parents, teachers, classmates, and even Bradley. She met him this way, after he gave in to her pressure after several refusals to go on a date. I soldered new contacts to the antenna input and checked the signal quality. All channels were clear. Another thing saved from the trash can. Unlike family relationships, electronics could actually be repaired with a little effort and patience. Going upstairs around noon, I saw 12 missed calls on my phone display. All from Savannah, of course. I turned on the answering machine and made myself lunch, eggs and bacon with toast. My appetite was excellent, despite the morning's troubles. Or maybe it was because of them. I finally stopped giving in to my daughter's whims and felt free. After lunch, I decided to walk to the post office in the store. Fresh air and exercise always helped me think more clearly. It was sunny and cool outside, a typical October day in Georgia, when summer was finally giving way to fall. The leaves on the trees were beginning to turn yellow, but there were still a few weeks left before the real fall. On the way, I met Mrs. Cooper, who was walking her old spaniel. The woman was delighted to see me and thanked me for fixing her radio. Now she could listen to the morning news and evening classical music again. We talked about the weather, supermarket prices, and how the neighborhood had changed in recent years. It was a pleasant, unhurried conversation that required no money, no sacrifices, and no compromises. When I returned home around 3 in the afternoon, I found that my answering machine was overflowing with messages. 22 calls during my absence. I didn't bother listening to them. It wasn't hard to guess what they were about. Savannah had probably gone through all the stages from requests to threats and was now in a state of righteous anger. I made myself some tea and settled into an armchair with a book when I heard the sound of a familiar car. Savannah was back, and this time she wasn't alone. 2 cars pulled up in the yard. My daughter and son-in-law got out of the red Chevrolet, and a woman I didn't recognize, about 40 years old, wearing a bright dress and carrying a large shoulder bag, got out of the blue Ford. I didn't get up from my chair and continued reading. Let them ring the doorbell, as they should. The first ring was polite, the second more insistent, and the third already irritated. Finally, I heard Savannah's voice. "Dad, I know you're home. Open up. We're not going anywhere." I had to put down my book and go to the door. Through the glass panel, I could see 3 guests. Savannah with a gloomy face, Bradley with his usual guilty expression, and a stranger who was quickly explaining something to my daughter, waving her arms. "What do you want?" I asked through the door. "Open up, Dad. We need to talk. It's very important." "We already talked it yesterday. My answer hasn't changed." "I brought Carol with me. She'll help us organize everything. Open the door. Don't make us stand on the street like beggars." Carol was apparently an event planner or something like that. Savannah had brought reinforcements, hoping that a professional would be able to convince me better than she could. Naive. No arguments would make me change my mind. I opened the door, but remained standing on the threshold, not inviting the guests in. "Dad, this is Carol Jenkins. She organizes private events," Savannah began, pointing to her companion. I asked her to look at the house and come up with a plan for the party. A very small, intimate one, 15 people maximum. 15 already, and there were 10 in the morning. By evening, it will probably be 25 to us. "Good afternoon, Mr. Stevens." Carol smiled a professional smile. "Your daughter told me about her birthday plans. You have a wonderful house, perfect for family celebrations. I'm sure we can arrange everything so that no one is disturbed." "Young lady," I replied politely, "I'm afraid you've wasted your time. There will be no celebrations in my house." "But why?" Carol looked genuinely surprised. "A birthday is a family celebration. Isn't it natural for a daughter to want to celebrate it in her parents' home?" "It may be natural, but I don't want to turn my home into a restaurant." Savannah tugged at Carol's sleeve and whispered something in her ear. The organizer nodded understandingly. "Mr. Stevens, what if we guarantee complete silence? No dancing, no loud music, just an elegant dinner with family and close friends. I've organized hundreds of events like this. I can ensure perfect order. No, I said and started to close the door. Wait! Savannah stuck her foot in the doorway. Dad, you're being selfish. It's my birthday, my party. Is it really so hard for you to let me have the house for one night? Savannah, move your foot, I said calmly. Otherwise, I'll have to call the police. My daughter looked at me suspiciously, as if she couldn't believe her father was capable of such a threat, but something in my tone convinced her that I was serious, and she backed off. Fine, she hissed through clenched teeth. Then we'll have a party without your permission. We'll come on Saturday night with all our guests, and there's nothing you can do about it. Try it, I replied and closed the door. I heard them arguing heatedly on the porch, then car doors slamming and driving away. Savannah wasn't joking. She really could come with a crowd of guests and try to force the party to happen. As a child, she often used similar tactics, throwing tantrums in public places where her parents couldn't stop her without attracting the attention of those around them. But now she was dealing not with parents who were afraid of scandal, but with a man who had nothing left to lose. I wasn't afraid of neighborhood gossip. I didn't care about the family's reputation, and I wasn't going to play the role of a loving father in front of strangers. If Savannah wanted war, she would get it. That evening, I took a travel bag out of the closet and started packing. A few shirts, a change of underwear, toiletries, the medication I took to regulate my blood pressure. Savannah thought she had me cornered, but she didn't know me very well. Every problem has a solution. You just have to find the right approach. Tom Wilson, my neighbor across the street, was a great guy. We had been friends for 10 years, often exchanging tools and helping each other with minor repairs. Tom lived alone after his wife's death, just like me, and we understood each other perfectly. He would certainly not refuse to offer hospitality to an old friend, but simply leaving the house was not enough. Savannah had to understand that she could not ignore other people's boundaries and take their property with impunity. The lesson had to be clear and memorable, and I knew exactly how to deliver it. Going down to the basement, I opened the electrical panel and carefully studied the wiring diagram. The main switch cut off the power to the entire house, and individual circuit breakers controlled the power to different rooms. The water heater, furnace, lighting, outlets, everything could be turned off with a single flick of the wrist. Without electricity, the house became an inconvenient and unattractive place to hold parties. No lights, no music, no way to heat food or make drinks. The refrigerator wasn't working, so there was nothing to drink except tap water. And on October evenings, it got quite chilly in a house without heating. It was an elegant way to ruin any celebration without resorting to scandals or calling the police. Technical sabotage that looked like a normal breakdown. Savannah could scream and fuss all she wanted, but what could she do with the power off? Find an electrician on a Saturday night? Fix a complex breakdown in an hour? Impossible. I went to bed feeling satisfied. Tomorrow morning I'll call Tom, arrange a place to stay, and by evening, Savannah will have learned a lesson she won't soon forget. Maybe he would make her reconsider her attitude toward her father and understand that I was not a helpless old man who could be pushed around. I spent Saturday at a leisurely pace, not letting on that I was preparing for war. In the morning, I called Tom Wilson and explained the situation. Without going into details, I simply said that my daughter was planning to throw a noisy party at my place, and I preferred to spend the evening in a quiet atmosphere. Tom laughed and invited me to stay the night at his place. He was just about to watch football and would be happy to have company. The day dragged on slowly. I tidied up the house, washed the dishes, and put all the food in the refrigerator except for my medications and protein shakes, which I drank on my doctor's recommendation. Let Savannah's guests see that an old man lives here, not a restaurateur ready to entertain them. I left only a bag of frozen peas and a few ice cubes in the freezer. Not exactly a festive menu either. Around 4 in the afternoon, I went down to the basement and checked the fuse box again. All the circuit breakers were in place, and the main switch was working properly. One movement of the hand, and the house would be plunged into darkness. I practiced several times, memorizing the location of the levers by touch. It might come in handy in the dark. I had prepared my travel bag in advance and hidden it in the storage room next to the back entrance. If Savannah arrived early and found me at home, I would have to leave quickly and quietly. The plan was simple. Wait for the first guest to arrive, turn off the electricity, and leave the house through the backyard while everyone was bustling about in the front yard. At 6 in the evening, I was already sitting by the living room window with a cup of tea, watching the empty street. Savannah was usually 15 to 20 minutes late, but the guests could arrive earlier. Some people, on the contrary, arrived too early and put the host in an awkward position. The first car appeared at 6:30, not Savannah's, but an unfamiliar black sedan. A couple in their mid-30s got out, dressed up and clearly ready for the party. The man was carrying a bottle of wine, the woman a large box that looked like a cake. They came to my door and rang the bell. I didn't answer. Let them wait for the hostess. It's her party. Let her greet the guests herself. The couple stood on the porch for about 5 minutes, then went back to the car and started making phone calls, probably to Savannah to find out where she was. 10 minutes later, another car arrived, then two more. There were already about 8 people in the yard, all dressed up, all with gifts and flowers. They talked among themselves, some laughed, some took selfies in front of my house. A typical scene. The guests arrived at the party, but the hosts were not there yet. Finally, at 7 o'clock, Savannah's red Chevrolet appeared. My daughter jumped out of the car in a bright blue dress and high heels. Bradley trailed behind with several bags from the supermarket. Savannah immediately began to explain to the guests that she was a little late because of shopping, that everything would be ready soon, and that the evening promised to be wonderful. She walked to the front door and took a set of keys out of her purse. But I had changed my locks a year ago, and the old keys didn't fit. Savannah tried several times, then she started pounding on the door with her fist. "Dad, open up! The guests are here!" I sat in a chair 3 meters from the door and didn't move. Let her shout, let her knock. She didn't get my permission for the party, so she has no right to come in. "Dad, I know you're home. Don't be so stubborn. People are standing on the street." The guests began to show signs of impatience. Some exchanged glances, others took out their phones. The party hadn't even started yet, and already there were problems. Not the best start to the celebration. Savannah moved away from the door and angrily explained something to the assembled guests. Then she took out her phone and started calling me. The phone rang in the living room, but I didn't answer. A minute later, she tried again, then again. It was useless. I wasn't going to make her life easier. "What's going on?" asked one of the guests, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit. "My father. He has these bouts of stubbornness," Savannah said loudly so that everyone could hear. "It's his age, you know. Sometimes he forgets his agreements." A lie, of course, but a beautiful one. She presented me as an old, senile man who couldn't remember his own promises. The guests nodded understandingly. Many of them were familiar with problems with elderly parents. "Don't you have a spare key?" asked the woman with the cake. "He changed the locks after Mom died." Savannah feigned sadness. "He's afraid of thieves, poor thing, and he forgot to give me new keys." Another lie, but also a plausible one. Now she was playing the role of a caring daughter who was concerned about the safety of her elderly father. Savannah had always been a good actress. Meanwhile, Bradley walked around the house and tried the back door. Locked, of course. He looked into the first-floor windows. The curtains were drawn, the lights were on, but I wasn't visible. Returning to his wife, he shrugged. "Maybe he really isn't home," he suggested. "Yes, he is," Savannah snapped. "The car is there, the lights are on. He's just sulking like a little child." She went back to the door and started banging on it even louder. "Dad, enough of this drama. Open up immediately, or I'll call a locksmith." A locksmith on a Saturday night was an empty threat, but the guests might believe it, and Savannah knew that. She needed to save face in front of her guests, to show that the situation was under control. I got up from my chair and quietly went down to the basement. The time had come. There were enough guests gathered for Savannah to not simply cancel the party. Now she had to either find a way into the house or admit to her friends that she had deceived them. The basement was quiet, only muffled voices from the street could be heard. I walked over to the electrical panel and put my hand on the main switch. A moment's hesitation, then a decisive downward movement. Click, and the house was plunged into darkness. It immediately became quiet. Apparently, the guests noticed that the lights in the windows had gone out. Then there were excited voices and footsteps on the porch. "What happened? Why did the lights go out?" "Probably a blown fuse." Or, "They cut off the meter for non-payment." I went upstairs and walked through the darkness to the kitchen. Through the window, I could see people in the yard shining their phones, trying to figure out what was going on. Savannah was explaining something heatedly, waving her arms. Bradley stood nearby, looking guilty. I took the bag I had prepared from the storage room and quietly left through the back door. There was no one in the yard. All the guests had gathered at the main entrance. I walked along the fence, trying not to make any noise, and headed across the backyard to the edge of the property. Behind the house were old oak trees that Dorothea had once planted for shade. Now they hid my movements from prying eyes. I walked around the neighbor's garage, climbed over a low fence, and found myself on the next street. From here, I could easily walk to Tom Wilson's house. The voices in the yard were getting louder. Apparently, the guests were beginning to realize that the party was in danger of being ruined. Savannah was trying to keep control of the situation, but without electricity in the house, there was little she could do. No music, no lighting, no way to cook or reheat food. I walked slowly, enjoying the cool October evening. The streets were quiet. Most people were sitting at home in front of their TVs or having dinner in restaurants. Occasionally, a car would drive by, but no one paid any attention to a lone elderly man with a travel bag. Tom Wilson's house was 2 blocks away from mine, on a parallel street. We met about 10 years ago when he moved to the neighborhood after his divorce. Tom worked as a railroad engineer and was a calm and sensible man. After Dorothea's death, he often came over just to talk. He understood how difficult it was to get used to being alone. I reached his house just as the sound of the television came from the living room windows. Tom was watching the evening news. His silhouette was visible through the uncurtained window. I climbed the porch steps and pressed the doorbell. "Ralph!" Tom opened the door wearing slippers and an old shirt. "How's it going, buddy? Can you hear the noise in your neighborhood?" "I can," I replied, lifting my bag. "That's my daughter having fun." "Really? What's going on?" "I heard some shouting, cars driving back and forth." "It's a long story. Can I come in? I'll tell you over a cup of coffee." "Sure, come in. Make yourself comfortable. I just brewed some fresh coffee." I entered the familiar living room, put my bag by the sofa, and sat down in an armchair. Tom's house was cozy, though somewhat neglected, a typical bachelor pad. Books on the shelves, old magazines on the table, no feminine touches like doilies or decorative pillows. "So, what happened with your daughter?" Tom asked, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "She decided to throw me a birthday party without my permission. She brought guests and is demanding to be let in, but I locked myself in and won't open the door." "Smart. What is she doing?" "Yelling, threatening, promising to call a locksmith. Savannah's usual methods." Tom laughed and handed me a cup. "Are you staying with her for long?" "Until tomorrow. Let her suffer today, and I'll go home in the morning. Maybe she'll learn her lesson." We drank coffee and listened to the distant sounds from my street. Occasionally, we heard car horns, doors slamming, muffled voices. Savannah clearly wasn't going to give up without a fight. Tom's house was almost identical to mine, a typical layout for a neighborhood built in the 70s. We went into the living room where a football game was playing on a big screen. Tom turned off the sound and sat me down in a comfortable chair in front of the TV. "Would you like something stronger than coffee?" he asked, nodding toward the bar in the corner of the room. "No, thank you. My medication doesn't mix well with alcohol. Coffee will be fine." "I understand. I've started having blood pressure issues too. It's just a sign of aging." We settled into our chairs, and I told Tom more about the situation with Savannah, about how she demanded the house for a party, about my refusal, about how she invited guests anyway. Tom listened attentively, sometimes shaking his head or smiling. "You know, Ralph, I had problems with my son too," he said when I finished. "True, he just asked to borrow money. He didn't try to take over my house, but the principle was the same. He thought his father owed him something." "And how did you solve the problem?" "One day I refused to give him money for another car. He made a scene, accused me of being greedy, said I was a bad father. Then he stopped calling for 6 months. And then what? Then he ran out of money and came to me himself to ask for forgiveness. But this time he had a concrete plan to pay back the debt and promised not to abuse my patience anymore." Tom stood up and walked over to the window facing my house. The street was dark, the street lights in our neighborhood that only turned on after 10 p.m. to save electricity. But you could hear car doors slamming and people talking. "Looks like your daughter's in trouble," he remarked. "There are fewer cars." I went to the window and looked toward my house. Sure enough, there were only 3 cars left in the yard instead of the 5 or 6 that had been there an hour ago. Apparently, some of the guests had already left without waiting for the party to start. People don't like uncertainty, I said with satisfaction. If the party doesn't start on time, they find more interesting ways to spend their Saturday night. What if she still finds a way to get into the house? The first floor windows are locked from the inside. The front doors are steel, with new locks. She could break a window, but then she'd have to explain to the guests why she's breaking into her own father's house. We returned to our chairs. Tom turned on the TV. There was some old black and white war movie on, with actors I remembered from the films of my youth. We watched in silence, but both listened to the sounds from the street. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, the noise in the yard began to subside. I looked out the window again. Only one car remained, Savannah's red Chevrolet. The other guests had apparently gone home. There was no one to be seen in the yard, only the occasional flash of a cell phone light near my porch. Stubborn girl, Tom remarked. All the guests have left, and she's still trying to come up with something. Savannah never gave up easily. At school, she would stand outside the principal's office for hours demanding a review of what she considered to be an unfair grade. And did she get her way? Sometimes. The teachers gave in just to get rid of her whining. But that trick wouldn't work on me. Tom made us ham and cheese sandwiches. We ate dinner while discussing the football season and political news. It was a typical male conversation without unnecessary emotions or psychological subtleties. I enjoyed Tom's company. He was one of those people you could sit with in silence without feeling awkward. At 9:30, we heard the sound of a car pulling up. I looked out the window and saw a white van with emergency electrical service written on it. Tom whistled. Wow, she found an electrician on her day off after all. It's going to cost her a lot. Emergency calls on Saturday night cost half my monthly pension. The electrician, a man in his 50s wearing overalls, got out of the van with a toolbox. Savannah immediately ran up to him and began to explain something, pointing to the dark windows of the house. The man nodded and headed for the basement. What will he find there? Tom asked. Working circuit breakers in the off position. No breakdowns, no blown fuses. Someone just turned off the electricity manually. And what will he tell your daughter? The truth, that only the person who turned off the lights can turn them back on. We watched as the electrician shone his flashlight into the basement windows, then disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, he reappeared and headed towards Savannah. Even from a distance, it was clear that my daughter was not happy with the news. She started waving her arms and raising her voice. The electrician stood there for a while longer, listening to her explanations, then shook his head and walked to his van. Savannah ran after him, clearly trying to convince him to stay and fix the problem. But the man just shrugged and drove away. I can imagine what he said to her, Tom chuckled. Something like, ma'am, someone here deliberately turned off the circuit breakers. I can turn them back on. But if the owner of the house is against it, they'll be turned off again tomorrow morning. Something like that. An experienced electrician can immediately tell the difference between an accident and sabotage. Savannah stood alone in the yard. Bradley was apparently sitting in the car. It was hard to see in the dark, but the red Chevrolet was rocking as if someone was moving around inside. My daughter stood there for about 5 minutes, then turned abruptly and headed for the car. She's giving up, I said with satisfaction. But the car didn't drive away. Instead, Savannah took some things out of the trunk and headed for the house. In the light of my phone's flashlight, I could see folding chairs and something that looked like a blanket. What is she doing? Tom asked in surprise. Looks like she's going to spend the night on the porch, playing the homeless daughter who was kicked out by her cruel father. Seriously? In October, it's going to be 10 degrees at night. Savannah is counting on me not being able to stand it and going out to her, or that the neighbors will see and shame me. She always loved to play to the crowd. Tom shook his head. What are you going to do? Nothing. Let her sit there if she wants to. She's a grown woman, responsible for her own decisions. We watched Savannah settle down on the porch. She arranged the chairs, covered herself with a blanket, and turned on the flashlight on her phone. From a distance, it really did look touching. A lone figure in front of a dark house. If you didn't know the backstory, you might feel sorry for her. What if she gets sick? Tom asked. At 46, one night in the fresh air won't kill her. Besides, the car has heating. If she gets really cold, she can move in there. You've become harsh, Ralph. Not harsh, realistic. I've indulged her whims for too long. It's time to set boundaries. But by 11 o'clock, Savannah was still sitting on the porch. Tom started yawning. His workday started early, and staying up late wasn't easy for him. I was tired too, but going to bed in this situation didn't seem right. Hey, maybe we should talk to her after all, Tom suggested. Explain my position, find a compromise. What compromise? She wants to throw a party at my house, and I'm against it. Where's the middle ground in that? Well, maybe agree to a small gathering. 5 or 6 people, no alcohol, until 10 o'clock. Tom, you talked about your son yourself. You gave in once, and he decided he could demand money all the time. It's the same with Savannah. Give her an inch, and she'll take a mile. Tom thought for a moment, then nodded. I guess you're right. I just feel sorry for the girl, although she's not a girl anymore. At 11:30, I saw Savannah get up and go to her car. Apparently, the cold and discomfort had overcome her stubbornness. She loaded the chairs into the trunk, got behind the wheel, and started the engine. The red Chevrolet slowly pulled away from the curb and disappeared around the corner. That's it. The show is over, I said. You can go to bed now. Tom showed me to the guest room, small but cozy, with a comfortable bed and a bedside table. I unpacked my things, took a shower, and went to bed, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that I had stood up for my principles. Sadness that it had come to open conflict with my only daughter. But I had no choice. Savannah had crossed all boundaries and there was nowhere else to retreat. Better loneliness than a life of constant fear of my daughter's demands and tantrums. At 73, a person has the right to peace and quiet in their own home. As I fell asleep, I thought about tomorrow. I'll go home, turn on the electricity, and clean up whatever the guests might have trampled on. And I'll go on living as I have for the past year, calmly, steadily, without fear of anyone. And Savannah can find other ways to celebrate her birthdays. I woke up around 7 in the morning, out of habit developed over decades of working in a factory. Outside the guest room window, a thrush was singing and the October sun was shining through the yellowing maple leaves. It was a quiet Sunday morning in a small American town, the kind of morning I loved to start my day with after I retired. Tom was already up and making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of fried bacon filled the house, and the morning news came from the radio. It was a typical Sunday idyll, uninterrupted by my daughter's hysterics, demands for money, or attempts to seize my property. Good morning, Ralph, my host greeted me. How did you sleep? Did thoughts of yesterday's events disturb you? I slept like a baby, I replied honestly, sitting down at the table. For the first time in many months, I wasn't worried that Savannah would come up with a new way to get money or the house out of me tomorrow. Do you think she'll calm down after yesterday's lesson? I hope so. Although I know my daughter, she can hold a grudge and come back in a month with new plans. But at least I'll have some peace and quiet for a while. We had breakfast, discussing the weather and our plans for the day. Tom was going to church. He wasn't a particularly religious man, but Sunday services helped him structure his week and socialize with his neighbors. I preferred to spend my Sundays at home, doing leisurely activities like reading or gardening. Around 9 in the morning, I gathered my things, thanked Tom for his hospitality, and headed home. It wasn't far to walk. 2 streets through a residential neighborhood where all the houses looked pretty much the same and all the residents knew each other by sight. It was a quiet, peaceful area for middle-aged people and retirees. My house greeted me with silence. There were no traces of yesterday's gathering, no trash on the lawn, no cigarette butts on the driveway, no forgotten items in the yard. Apparently, Savannah had cleaned up after her guests, or the guests had been polite enough not to litter in someone else's yard. I entered the house and immediately went down to the basement to turn on the electricity. With the flick of a switch, the house came to life. The refrigerator hummed, the clock on the microwave flashed, and the automatically tuned radio in the living room turned on. Everything returned to normal, as if yesterday's siege had never happened. The house was in its usual order. I walked through all the rooms, checking to see if Savannah had left any surprises. But everything was in its place. Books on the shelves, photos on the tables. Even the dust was where it had been yesterday. My daughter had not been able to get inside despite all her efforts. After making myself a cup of coffee, I settled into my favorite chair with the Sunday paper. It was a pleasant read. No one called, knocked on the door, or demanded immediate decisions or financial investments. Just a quiet Sunday morning for a 73-year-old widower who finally had the opportunity to live for himself. Around noon, the phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID. Savannah, of course. She probably wanted to talk about yesterday's events, try to justify herself, or find new arguments to pressure my father. I didn't answer. I had nothing to say to her, and I didn't want to listen to more reproaches and accusations. The calls repeated every 15 minutes for an hour, then stopped. Apparently, Savannah realized that I wasn't going to respond, or she came up with a new plan of action that didn't require my participation. Anything was possible with my daughter. In the afternoon, I worked in the garden, raking fallen leaves and preparing the flower beds for winter. Physical work always calmed me down, especially after stressful situations. A rake in my hands, the sun on my back, slow, measured movements. No rush, no outside pressure. My neighbor, Mrs. Cooper, came out into her yard and waved to me over the fence. The elderly woman was curious but tactful. She had surely noticed yesterday's commotion, but she didn't ask any direct questions. We talked about the weather and how her radio was working perfectly after my repair. "Mr. Stevens, did you have guests last night?" she finally asked, unable to resist. "My daughter wanted to have a party," I replied briefly. "But plans changed." "I see. I thought maybe there was a problem with the electricity. I saw the lights go out." "A minor glitch. Everything's fine now." Mrs. Cooper nodded and went back into the house. She was one of those neighbors who noticed everything but didn't gossip unnecessarily. Unlike some of the other residents on our street who would have blown yesterday's events out of proportion. In the evening, while I was watching TV, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Savannah calling, but an unfamiliar number. I answered out of curiosity. "Hello? Mr. Stevens? This is Carol Jenkins, the event planner. We met the day before yesterday. The woman who came with Savannah to assess my house for the party. I wonder why she's calling." "I'm listening." "Mr. Stevens, I would like to apologize for the inconvenience. Your daughter did not warn me that the party was being planned without your consent. It was unethical of me." "No need to apologize. You were just doing your job. The thing is, Savannah asked me to contact you and try to find a compromise. She is very upset about what happened and is willing to make concessions." "What concessions?" "Well, for example, reducing the number of guests to 10, or move the event to an earlier time, say from 3 to 7 p.m. No alcohol, just tea and light snacks. It's typical of Savannah to ask for a mediator when direct negotiations reach an impasse. She was counting on a professional to come up with arguments that hadn't occurred to her." "Mrs. Jenkins," I said politely, "I'm afraid you don't quite understand the situation. It's not about the number of guests or the time of the event. It's about the principle. My daughter wants to use my house for her own purposes against my will. That is unacceptable. But family celebrations, a family holiday is when the family gets together by mutual agreement. When a daughter brings a crowd of strangers into her father's house against his will, that's called something else." Carol paused, apparently considering my response. "Mr. Stevens, what if your daughter apologizes formally and compensate you for all your inconvenience?" "Mrs. Jenkins, I understand that Savannah hired you to organize the event and you wanted to do your job. But my decision is final. There will be no party at my house." "Okay, I understand your position. Sorry again for bothering you." She hung up. Half an hour later, the phone rang again. It was Savannah. "Dad, did you talk to Carol?" "I did." "And? Didn't she explain that we're willing to compromise? Just a small party, no extra guests, everything civilized." "Savannah, my answer remains the same. No." "But why?" My daughter's voice became thin, almost childlike. "Daddy, please, it's my birthday. I've been planning this party for so long." The old tactic, first business negotiations through intermediaries, then emotional pressure. Savannah always used this algorithm when she wanted to get her way. "You planned it without my involvement," I reminded her. "No one stopped you from asking for permission in advance." "But I thought you wouldn't mind. We're family." "Precisely because we're family, you should have respected my opinion." "Dad, what's the big deal? It's just one evening. You can stay with Aunt Martha or at a hotel. I'll pay for it." Savannah, I said no. Enough of this conversation. You've changed since Mom died, she suddenly shouted. You've become mean and selfish. Mom would never have done this. It was a low blow. Savannah knew how painful it was for me to hear any suggestion that I was betraying my wife's memory, but this time I was prepared for such a turn of events. Mom was the lady of the house and could make decisions about guests, I replied calmly. Now I'm the man of the house, but the house will be mine after you die. I have a say in this. As long as I'm alive, you have no rights to my house. What happens after I die is a separate conversation. The threat of disinheritance had a sobering effect. Savannah fell silent for a few seconds. You can't do this to me, she said more quietly. I'm your daughter, your only daughter. That's exactly why it hurts me to see what you've become, a selfish, demanding woman who thinks the whole world owes her. I'm not selfish. I just know what I want. Knowing what you want and demanding it at any cost are two different things. Savannah raised her voice again. What's wrong with wanting to celebrate my birthday in style? Is that such a terrible request? Nothing is wrong with that. What's wrong is that you want to celebrate it in someone else's house against the owner's will. Someone else's? This is my childhood home. I grew up here. I spent the best years of my life here. And that's exactly why you should be ashamed of trying to take it by force. A long pause. Then Savannah said in a cold tone, Fine, Dad, you've got your way. But remember, sooner or later you'll need my help. And then we'll see who dictates the terms. She hung up the phone. It was a direct threat, a hint that when I grew old and frail, she would take revenge for today's humiliation. Perhaps she would try to have me declared incompetent or simply refuse to help me when I really needed it. But these threats no longer frightened me. At 73, I was in good shape, had regular medical checkups, and had no serious health problems. Helpless old age was still a long way off, and only time would tell what would happen in 10 or 15 years. The main thing is that today I defended my right to live peacefully in my own home. Savannah learned a lesson that, I hope, will make her reconsider her attitude toward her father. And if it doesn't, well, I'll live alone, but with a clear conscience. I spent the evening reading, then watched an old movie on TV. No one else called, no one knocked on the door. It was a normal, quiet Sunday evening, the kind I would have many more of. And I intended to enjoy every one of them. Monday began as usual, up at 7, coffee and toast, watching the morning news. Outside the window, a light rain was falling, typical for October in Georgia. The day promised to be quiet and uneventful, without unpleasant surprises or family conflicts. I planned to repair the old toaster that my neighbor from the next street had brought me yesterday. But around 10 in the morning, a knock on the door interrupted my plans. It was sharp, insistent, clearly unfriendly. I looked out the window and saw a familiar sight, a red Chevrolet in the driveway, Savannah on the porch in a black coat and dark glasses. Bradley stood by the car, as usual, avoiding direct involvement in conflicts. I took my time opening the door, let her stand there and think about her behavior. Yesterday's phone call made it clear that my daughter had no intention of apologizing or changing her attitude toward her father. Most likely she had come up with a new tactic to pressure me. The calls were getting longer and more insistent. Then she started pounding on the door with her fist, the familiar sound of childhood tantrums that had lasted for decades. Finally, I decided to find out what she wanted this time. What do you want, Savannah? I asked without opening the door. Open up. We need to talk seriously. What is there to talk about? Everything was said yesterday. Dad, enough of this drama. Open the door or I'll keep knocking until the whole neighborhood wakes up. A typical threat, to embarrass me in front of the neighbors. When I was young, it worked without fail, but now I didn't care what others thought. Let her knock, let her scream. Every adult is responsible for their own behavior. But Savannah really started banging on the door with such force that it seemed as if she wanted to break it down. Her expensive Italian high heels turned into a battering ram against my porch. I realized it was better to listen to her now than to put up with the noise until evening. Opening the door, I stood on the threshold without inviting her in. Savannah looked tired and angry. Apparently, she hadn't slept well after yesterday's fiasco. The dark circles under her eyes, which even sunglasses couldn't hide, spoke of a sleepless night. You ruined my birthday, she began without preamble. Now the whole town knows that my own father made me look like a fool in front of my friends. I didn't make anyone look like a fool. You made yourself look like a fool by throwing a party without the owner's permission. Owner, Savannah snorted. You talk as if I'm a stranger. As if this isn't my home. It's not your home. Your home is where you live with your husband. She took off her dark glasses, and I saw her eyes red from crying. Apparently, yesterday's failure had really hurt her. But I felt no pity. Savannah had played on my emotions for too many years to get what she wanted. You've changed, Dad, she said more quietly. You never used to be so cruel. You never used to try to take over my house. Take over? I wanted to have a family celebration. With 30 people I don't know? Is that a family celebration? Savannah was taken aback for a second, apparently forgetting that she had originally asked for permission to throw a big party, not a quiet family celebration. Well, memo, maybe there would have been a lot of guests, but they're all my friends. Good, well-mannered people who ran away as soon as the first difficulties arose. The blow hit its mark. Savannah was truly humiliated that the people she had invited did not wait for the electricity problems to be resolved. Instead of support in a difficult moment, she received polite apologies and a quick escape. They couldn't have known you would do something so mean, she blurted out. People were expecting a normal party, and they got some kind of madhouse. A madhouse is when a daughter brings a crowd of strangers into her father's house against his will. They're not strangers, they're my colleagues, classmates, neighbors, decent people. Then they should be ashamed of themselves for participating in the takeover of someone else's home. Savannah raised her voice again. No one took over anything. We just wanted to have a party in a beautiful place. Our apartment doesn't have a living room or kitchen like this, and I have no desire to turn my home into a restaurant for strangers. Strangers! Strangers again! Savannah threw up her hands. They're my friends, people who have known me since childhood. And what do these people think of you now, after you failed to provide basic amenities at your own party? Another painful jab. Savannah had always cared about her reputation, about how she looked in the eyes of others. The party fiasco could seriously undermine her authority among her acquaintances. I explained everything to them, she said less confidently. I told them about your illness, about your memory problems. What illness? What memory problems? Well, age-related changes, forgetfulness. People understand that it's hard for old people to think clearly. So she presented me as a senile old man who couldn't remember his own promises. A convenient lie that explained my behavior without casting a shadow on Savannah herself. But this lie could have serious consequences in the future. Savannah, I'm warning you for the last time, I said harshly. Stop spreading rumors about my health. Otherwise, I'll have to take action. What measures? She asked mockingly. Are you going to sue your own daughter? If necessary, yes. You wouldn't dare. It would be a scandal. Everyone would find out that the Stevens have family problems. I no longer care what strangers think. Unlike you. Savannah thought for a moment, apparently assessing the seriousness of my intentions. Then she changed tactics, shifting from aggression to attempts at emotional manipulation. Dad, why are we fighting? She asked, almost plaintively. We're family, the only loved ones we have left after Mom's death. That's exactly why it hurts me to see you become an uncontrollable egoist. I'm not an egoist. I just want to live beautifully. What's wrong with that? What's wrong is that you want to live beautifully at my expense. At your expense? Savannah was indignant. I didn't ask for money, just a house for one night. The house, electricity, heating, cleaning up after guests, the risk of damage to property, all of that cost money. My money. That's nothing. And besides, I promised to clean everything up. Your promises are worthless. You promised not to bother me with requests for money, and yet you ask me regularly. You promised not to interfere in my life, and yet you dictate how I should live. Savannah put her dark glasses back on, apparently to hide her tears or anger. You've changed since Mom died, she repeated. You've become angry, vengeful. Mom would never have approved of your behavior. Mom would never have approved of your attempts to take over our house. Our house, you said it yourself. Ours. That means I have a right to it. You have no rights as long as I'm alive. And after my death, that's also a big question. What do you mean? Savannah's voice became tense. I mean that the will can be rewritten. There are many worthy charities that will find better use for my property. The threat of disinheritance had an immediate effect. Savannah turned pale, took off her glasses, and stared at me with wide eyes. You can't do that. I'm your daughter, your flesh and blood. That's exactly why I'm ashamed of your behavior. Dad, what did I do that was so terrible? I wanted to celebrate my birthday in a beautiful place. Is that really a crime? The crime is ignoring the opinion of the owner of the house and forcing your will on him. But I didn't use force. I asked, explained, begged. And when you were refused, you invited the guests anyway. That's called coercion. Savannah paused, apparently trying to find new arguments. Then she asked, what do I have to do for you to forgive me? An unexpected turn. Usually, Savannah demanded forgiveness without offering anything in return. Apparently, the threat of losing her inheritance really scared her. First, apologize. Truly, not just for show. I'm sorry, forgive me, Dad, I was wrong. Second, promise that it won't happen again. I promise, I swear, no more parties without your permission. Third, stop asking me for money and property. Forever. Savannah hesitated. Refusing her father's financial support meant the end of years of solving her problems at someone else's expense. But what if there really is an emergency? She asked cautiously. An emergency is a threat to life or health. Everything else can be solved on your own. What about a new car, home repairs, your grandchildren's education? None of that is an emergency, just normal living expenses. You have a husband with you have your own income. Savannah bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and inheritance. The inheritance won. Okay, she said reluctantly. I promise I won't ask for money anymore. And the fourth condition is to stop spreading rumors about my health incapacity. I'm not spreading any rumors. I just explained to my friends why you were acting so strangely. The owner of the house was acting strangely when he didn't let uninvited guests in. Well, maybe I didn't express myself correctly. Express yourself correctly. And remember, in any attempt to question my capacity will have serious consequences for your future. Savannah nodded, clearly unhappy with this turn of events. She had hoped for quick forgiveness and a return to their previous relationship, but instead she received harsh conditions and threats. Now go home, I said, and think about your behavior. At 46, it's time to learn to respect other people's boundaries. Can I come see you next week? Just to talk? You can, but I'm warning you, I won't listen to any requests for money or property. Savannah nodded and walked to the car. Bradley, who had been standing by the Chevy the whole time, opened the door for her and helped her in. The poor guy looked as if he wanted to sink through the ground in shame at his wife's behavior. The car drove away and I was left alone on the porch in the drizzling rain. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary. Savannah had been given clear boundaries and an understanding of the consequences of violating them. We'll see if she has the sense to follow the new rules. Returning to the house, I made myself a strong cup of tea and sat down in an armchair. I felt uneasy, and after all, it's not very pleasant to quarrel with your only daughter at my age. But there was no choice. Better an honest conflict than a false peace built on my constant concessions. The rest of the day passed quietly. No one called, no one came, no one demanded explanations. I repaired my neighbor's toaster, read the newspaper, and watched the evening news. An ordinary Monday for a 73-year-old retiree who finally got the chance to live by his own rules.